Hello, folks. This is Andy Pace with Non-Toxic Environments. This week, we'll be talking with Amanda Klecker. Amanda is a building biologist, and you've heard that term before. I've talked about it many times over the years. But Amanda is going to be talking to us today about what she does in her practice. Up in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, Amanda is a Certified Building Biology Practitioner. Amanda is a certified home inspector, a water quality standards academy certificate holder. She is a Jill of all trades when it comes to teaching us how to create and live in a healthier home. And I had the pleasure of being on her podcast a few months ago, and just a great conversation. And since then, have been really looking forward to having her on my show so we can learn more about who she is and what she does. And I really couldn't be more excited to bring you this show this week. So without any further delay, here's Amanda. Hello, everybody. We are live, Non-Toxic Environments this week. This week, we're live from beautiful, balmy Wisconsin. Last week we were down in Florida, and it was fantastic. And it's nice and warm down there. Let's see, we left Florida, it was about 85 degrees, and come home here and we had snow flurries. So typical Wisconsin weather. I don't mind it. Luckily the heat baked out the cold that I had, so I'm feeling a lot better today. So this is really exciting for me because last week we had Sheila Alston on here, and we were talking about wellness real estate and how these communities being built around the country to be built around organic gardens and communities just living within their space. And it's very exciting to see these popping up around the country. But most often, obviously, 99.9% of the time, we're dealing with a client who is buying a home, building a home in a standard environment, and we have to play the guessing game of what this particular home is going to offer us. And I know over the years that I've been hired just to run through Zillow listings with customers to see what I can find out, from my point of view. But I think it's very important to have somebody on site who knows how to do a building inspection that is really based on health of the occupant first. And so this week is a great show because we have Amanda Klecker on with us. And Amanda owns a company called Healthy House on the Block, but she's much more than just a website and a blogger and a social influencer. She wears a lot of hats. And what attracted me to what she does right away is she's a building biologist, and I can't tell you how often I refer to building biologists, somebody local, when I'm working remotely. And so I want to introduce to everybody Amanda. Amanda, how are you today?
Good. Hi, Andy. Thank you. I'm good. Yes,
Excellent.
I'm also in the Midwest here, so it is spring. It's a little chilly, but I feel your pain when you were talking about Florida. I'm like, well, that sounds really nice.
Yeah, it was great for about 5 days, and and then I come back and there's still piles of ugly snow.
Yes.
That's
Yeah. Well, you got to have we have lots of snow activities that we do here.
Mhm.
Skiing, snowmobiling, get outside because that's the only way you will survive.
Honestly, you have to embrace it.
Yep. Totally.
And so we try to embrace it with snowshoeing and cross country
Yeah.
skiing and all that. But it is nice just to have some sunshine for a while, and it was a pleasant break. But I'm
Good.
happy to be back here behind the microphone. So
Yeah.
just give us a quick overview of what all the different things that you do. You have so many services, and so we'll get into them in a little bit, but I just wanted to hear kind of an overview of what you do.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's because a house is so many systems and they all work together. And so it's kind of a snowball effect. One thing leads to another. And so locally here in the Twin Cities, I am a home inspector, and I do home inspections, for real estate transactions. So people buying a home. Sometimes we do inspections to sell a home. But more often than not, it's going in before someone buys to make sure that we know what's going on with this house. We know what they might want to negotiate. We know what they're going to have to take care of in the future as a homeowner. I also do a lot of environmental testing here. So I do VOC testing, mold testing, radon testing, and formaldehyde testing locally in the Twin Cities. And so that's a way that we can really get into what is really going on with this house. Because there are things that you can't see. There are things that often are covered up. And then I also look at the health of homes as a building biology practitioner. And so that means that I understand and can help families lower the toxic load in their house. We can kind of come up with a plan to make changes in the future, changes you can make right now, and then habits you can change. So it's like it's a process. It's not like there's not really an end goal. It's just a lifestyle change. And so that's kind of in a nutshell what I do.
Excellent. So let me start by talking about the building biology side of it, because I was on the board of directors of the Building Biology Institute here in the U.S., and I assume the same organization that you got certified through. Fantastic organization. They really have written the book on the certification process for somebody who wants to be involved in building biology and the study of the human interaction within the built environment. It's vastly different from something like LEED or Energy Star, where they're just really focusing on energy efficiency and global environmental concerns, but truly, how do we interact as humans within the built environment? So, how has that, first of all, how has that gone for you since getting certified? Has that been a real improvement to your career?
I mean, it has been. I actually just, as like on the consumer level, learned so much that I actually didn't even know, because I think a lot of us go into trying to create a healthier home with an idea of a small area that we can change. And really, it's so broad. There's so many things that we can alter and change in our house. I think it has really given me insight on how to do guide remodels or renovations or new building projects. It can be a little bit trickier and maybe not as applicable when we're trying to change an existing home without making large home improvements. But I have learned so much about EMFs. I think that was a big area that I didn't maybe understand how toxic it was in our homes. And so that was something that was very eye-opening to me. And it also helped me understand how we want our homes to be breathable. And it really kind of there was a shining moment where you could see the difference between toxin free or low toxin and energy efficient. And I think a lot of times there is a little bit of crossover maybe from low toxin to energy efficient, but it's not the same thing. And so that was very eye-opening to me as well, because I think especially when I first got into this, and I did my building biology training after I did my home inspection training. And home inspection training really is focused on an energy efficient home. There's really nothing about toxins aside from maybe mold or asbestos or lead, things that we see in older homes or homes that have had moisture issues. And so I kind of just had those thoughts in my head about those particular toxins. And then to learn about like building materials that can be toxic, or VOCs, or different solvents that are in the home, that was very eye-opening. And it just gave a lot to think about, where you think about your space and you look around you and you go, I am surrounded by toxins everywhere. What do I do? And so that was kind of, for me, it felt overwhelming at first, but my personality is more like, okay, let's figure it out. And I just kind of come up with a plan. I don't tend to get super stressed about these things, but I knew that there were people out there that were very frustrated and stressed. And so that's why I wanted to come up with plans, very simple to follow, step-by-step plans that we could at least minimize some of these toxins if we can't, get rid of them.
That's a great approach because, all too often, especially with the clients that we deal with on a regular basis, they're somewhat paralyzed by the fear of the unknown, and rightfully so. I've talked about this numerous times in the show that I've had clients who have lived in one room of their home coated in aluminum foil, and
Mm-hmm.
so while that's one out of every 10,000 customers I deal with, um, it's still it tells you that there is a problem, and other people, and they may not be using aluminum foil to mask the problems. They might be using other things to mask the problems, and a lot of times it's basically a sort of a mental mask of, if I just concentrate on hoping that things aren't there and wishing that things will be safer, maybe they will be. And so it's again, it points, it shines a spotlight on what the real problems are. Now, with building biology, as you mentioned, electromagnetic fields and electromagnetic radiation is a huge part of it. And I would say that between that and mold, those are probably the two biggest issues that are starting to become very popular with clients these days. And the two of those go actually sort of hand in hand, don't they?
Um,
I mean, from a
uh,
standpoint of
mo-
like mycotoxin, from what I
yes.
understand, the mycotoxin release can be exacerbated by electromagnetic fields.
Yeah, and I think really what the big problem is every home has mold.
Mm,
Every home has EMFs. And
right.
so really our body is not getting a break from those things. And so to me, those are the big ones because they're everywhere. And there's something that, you could probably mitigate to a point, but you probably will not be completely free of them. And I think that part too can be kind of stressful to people when they think about, well, I can't have a completely toxin free home. I have these big things that I'm hearing about and how bad they are for, my nervous system, or um, my hormones, things like that. It can be just, I think when we focus on that, it can be
Hmm.
very frustrating to people. But yeah, those are two really big things. And I think mold, especially, we're seeing a lot of people with proper diagnoses. One thing that is, kind of too bad is a lot of times we can't diagnose our house, or we don't diagnose our house until we ourselves have been diagnosed in some way, where
Hmm.
we see a doctor and we know, oh, I have had mold exposure. I need to find out where that's from. Is that from my house? Now I have to test my house because I can't heal my body if I don't heal my house first. I can't bring my healthy body back into this environment. And so mold is a big one that you hear about a lot. And so, the nice thing is there are ways to test a home before you move in. You can do a mold test before you move in. It's not very common, unfortunately. A lot of times it's it's not proactive. It's, in response to, I'm not feeling good. I think I
Right.
might want to have my house tested for mold. And with EMFs, it's a little bit different because every home is going to have some level of that type of toxin in their home. And it's, to me, more, how can we mitigate some of it? How
Right.
can we choose to use our electronics in a healthier way so that we aren't bombarding our body, but still live in a modern society where we're all connected? I mean, I'm sitting here on my computer with you
Mm-hmm.
talking. We use these things. They're tools. It's amazing what we can do, but we just have to use them in a healthier way. And so with EMFs, I tend to be more, let's kind of create a space in your home, maybe that's as free from EMF exposure as possible, preferably the bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
And then just other ways we can use things in a just smarter. You can't just, you're not going to plop your laptop down on your body. You're not going to, have your bedroom back up to your induction stove wall or something like that. So there's a lot of things we can do to just kind of minimize that risk. And with mold, we can do a lot of testing before before it's too late, I guess. You just have to be proactive.
Again, I love that approach. I think that it's impossible to avoid all electromagnetic fields. I mean,
Yes.
you could literally walk around every home in the country with a tri-field meter and you'll find something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what level is dangerous? What level is acceptable? And this is where it gets
Yeah.
into um, making sure that you are setting up a set of protocols for each individual client that is tailored for each client, because everybody's threshold is a little bit different.
That is so true. And that is, I think that is what I have, that is one of the biggest lessons I have learned over the last 5 years of really doing this like full time is every home and every client is different. So their body's needs are going to be different than their neighbors, than even other people within their home. And the type of what they have going on in their home is going to be different. And so really it's you have to customize it. It has to be tailored to each individual person. I have a client right now who has had 3 smart meters in her home, and they're they're exacerbating her. She feels it. So many people would never even notice this. And so it really is, people are sensitive on different levels, and they're sensitive to different toxins. One person might be very sensitive to formaldehyde, and one person might be very sensitive to EMFs. It's just one person might be sensitive to both. It is very, we have to take into consideration like all of these different factors when you're trying to come up with a plan of how to move forward so that people's bodies heal, they feel good, their space is healthy when their body, when their body is healed. It's like it's a bunch of things kind of combined into one like wellness idea. Because if you have an unhealthy space but you're healing your body and you come back to this space, your body's never going to feel fully heal. We have to do these things simultaneously so that we can feel better and heal our bodies.
So that actually brings me to a or sort of a related topic. Last
Yeah.
night, as a matter of fact, I was on a podcast for a healthy home builder, and he's a custom home builder, builds just unbelievably monumental homes in Northern Illinois. Beautiful work. And he's got a couple of business partners, associates, or friends in the industry from different parts of the country, and they all do a podcast on home building. And they've all built green homes before. But when we started talking to healthy home, I had 3 guys just looking at me like I had 3 heads. It's like they 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 couldn't believe there's such a strong difference between what is a green home and what is a healthy home. And
Yeah.
again, their first question is, of course, well, what standards do you follow? And I had to explain to them, well, I follow my own standards. I take a little bit of everything. I've been on the board of the IBE. I've been on the board of the U.S. Green Building Council in their lead program. I was co-author of the Wisconsin Green Build Home program back in the 90s. So I really understand building checklists, but I also understand how lacking they are of any healthy components, any human friendly components. And so I had to take a little bit of everything. And quite honestly, the checklist that the Building Biology Association has of like the 25 points that make to make a healthy home are probably the best out there. They're not very detailed exactly how to achieve it, but it's
No.
like guidelines. And if you look at those guidelines, you say, well, God, it makes tons of sense. So when you're working with builders, I would imagine that this discussion comes up like, hey, I do zero VOC and I do this and that. And you have to tell them, great, that's a good start. Now let's talk healthy.
It is very challenging. And I will say one of the things that I've had to have conversations with my clients with, because a lot of times I'm hired by the homeowner or the home, who's going to be buying the home. And so I work with them to come up with a list and materials and fixtures, appliances, things that are going to be low toxin for their home, whatever the project may be. And then they usually are kind of the go-between for their contractor. And what I've had to explain to them is a lot of times contractors are comfortable using the products they know.
Mhm.
So they're not always on board when I give them a recommendation for a toxin-free silicone or toxin-free adhesive or caulking. They kind of are like, no, I have the one I want to use. And so what I like to do is give them a good and a best scenario, right?
Yeah.
So it's something that's lower toxin and something that's toxin free. And I kind of give them the caveat that if your contractor is more comfortable with just the low toxin and not the toxin free, I think I would choose that, because you also have to think, I want my home built the right way, or I want my
Mhm.
project done the right way. And if my contractor has no idea how to use this product because there are nuances to it, or they're just not comfortable using it, that's something it's a give and take. You can't have it all right now, unfortunately, unless you can find a builder that knows these things, or a contractor that really is on board with toxin free materials and understands them, which is a conversation to have before you hire, or
Yeah.
even just letting them know, hey, i I have some sensitivities, or this is very important to the health of my family. A lot of my clients are, trying to grow their families, and so it's huge for them to have a low toxin space, even while the project is going on. So even while things are curing, they might be in and out of the house, and so they want those things to be as toxin free as possible. So having that conversation ahead of time and letting them know, hey, I plan to give you some not recommendations, or just some guidelines on what I would like for the materials used, can kind of help. I think it would weed out at least the contractors who just don't want to deal with that at
Yeah.
all,
Yeah.
because there are those, and they probably, it wouldn't be a good fit for the homeowner anyways. So, if you can weed them out right away, I guess. That's the conversation I've had with my clients, is when you're looking for a contractor, have that conversation up front. Be very transparent about what you are looking for and what your desires are for your home, because it is your home. You're going to be the one living there. They're just doing the work. But it is tricky because they don't they don't they're they don't know about the products, or they look at them and feel like they're not as good as the products that they're used to using.
Mhm.
And so it can be a little bit frustrating. But I don't know, I don't know, I haven't found like a great solution for it other than just communication.
Well, I'm glad you said that because that's the one thing that I stress on every project I'm on is communication. And I don't care if it's, if it's good communication, like, saying happy things or saying things that need to be said, but you've
Yeah.
got to have those conversations. And so a couple things that I find out first is, years ago when I first got into this business, I got so frustrated from painting contractors. Every time I gave them a gallon of Safe Coat paint to use, they said no, 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 and
Mhm.
they gave me every excuse under the sun why they didn't want to use it. And I finally realized, because I was young, I was 20, 21, 22 years old when I first started selling these products, and it took me a while to really understand that painting contractors, like any contractor, they, their livelihood is based upon the projects that they finish correctly in a timely manner. And
Mhm.
I can't get mad at them for pushing back on something they've never used before, because um, if something goes wrong, that's their problem. Now, there's this unwritten rule in the construction business that, if any contractor or subcontractor starts to use a product, that contractor now sort of owns the process, and they're responsible. So what's happening now is I get contractors saying to their customer, well, okay, I'll use that product, but I'm not going to guarantee my work.
Exactly.
And that's their way of essentially, wiping their hands clean. Now my response to that is, any contractor who is on the up and up is never going to agree to use a product and then say they're not responsible. They're going to, a good contractor will say, I won't use this product and here's why. So if you ever get yourself in a situation where there's a contractor who says, I'm not going to warranty my work, I would say then you're fired,
Right.
because I would rather have you tell me you would not use it and here's why. Let's have that discussion. Um, instead of saying I'll use it and now I I can just completely bunk the application of it and just blame the product and say, see, it's not my fault, and put the customer behind the eight ball. So,
Right.
um, like Jay says, Jay Watts just chimed in. Sometimes contractors will see the lights and add healthy products to their toolkits. And that is correct. And we've found that out now with customers we've worked with around the country. I always recommend it if you can't find a contractor in your area that builds healthy homes. And I'll tell you, folks, you'll never find one that actually knows how to build a healthy home.
Yeah.
You'll find a very good custom home builder that is really eager to do it. Matter of fact, just about every home I've been involved with now across the country with a custom home builder, they'll always tell me that they've really wanted to do this, but they're waiting for the first client to sort of jump into the process, because
Yeah.
they don't know enough to start recommending materials to new customers. If a customer comes to them and says, I want to work with you, and I'll work with Andy or work with Amanda to create a healthy home, let's do this process together. Now they'll get done with that project and they'll have all these new materials and methods that they're familiar with they could offer to the next client.
Yeah, and I mean, wouldn't that be amazing if that could just continuously, like, reach its fingers out throughout the whole country? And I think a lot of what I see is they're learning so much about these things. While this process is happening. One of my clients that I worked with recently, the big concern for her was she wanted products without lead in them.
Mhm.
And while I do, I know about heavy metals and I know quite a bit, I even learned something while I was looking for very specific handles, knobs, fixtures, things that wouldn't have any sort of lead in them at all, in case, the outer enamel wore away or things like that.
Mhm.
And so her contractor also is learning all of these things, which, yes, then he could take to the next client, or even if a client has a question about it, or, you know, says, I heard this on the news about lead being in doorknobs. What's the deal with that? And he could educate them. And so, really, unfortunately, this healthy home idea is still, we're still in this education phase where people are not taught this. People who are buying a home, this is not the first thing on their mind.
Mhm.
Things like we've talked about, like mold, that's starting to become something that people are paying attention to when they're buying a home. And then two, it's realtors too. If a realtor is knowledgeable about these things, they can talk to their clients or even just plant the seed about things that could be toxic in the home. But it takes a realtor who actually understands and knows and wants to guide their client in that direction.
Right.
And so it's just a lot of teaching, I think, and getting word out, because unless you are seeking out this information, it is not going to be brought to you, most likely.
Mhm. Well, and that's a great point. I think that all too often contractors, their knee-jerk reaction is to basically um, push back and say, "Well, I know that that might be a concern, but it really isn't." So
Yeah.
our experience is, I said this last night. I use this line almost in every consult I do. I said the pushback is normally from the contractor. Hey, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I'm not sick, and I know what I'm doing. And my response is, I've been golfing for 30 years and I'm still horrible. It doesn't, just because you do something doesn't make you an overall expert at it. And so
Yeah.
it requires some learning.
Yes, it definitely does. And I think it requires some open-mindedness.
Yes.
And I think about my local area with contractors. A lot of contractors are needed. They are not like trying to find work. It's coming to them. You can't book a contractor for the next week or two. Like,
Mhm.
we have a contractor that we've used for several projects in our home because he's very easygoing. He will use what we, give to him, and he doesn't care. He could care less if it's low toxin or something he brought, it's fine, whatever. He'll work with it. And he's very open-minded. And so we want to book him for another project. He's months out.
Yeah.
And so when they're not having to change what they do because the work is just flowing in, that's a whole nother set of issues because, well, I don't need this. I don't need to work for this client who has all of these boxes that I need to check in the low toxin, toxin-free home area. I'll just go to this other client and do that project because it's going to take me less time. And I'm, not going to be having to pull my hair out trying to figure out all of these things that they want me to figure out that I'm not familiar with, or use products that I don't like or I don't want to use. And so there's part of that too. And I think the contracting field, a lot of people come in from other areas, like our contractor used to be an electrician and now he does contracting work. He didn't fall into this because he wanted to make homes healthier. And so there's a huge disconnect. And so I think that's where like and everything that you put out with your podcast and how you help your clients it's so important because it's educating everybody on what's going on. And I think we're finding new things out all the time about toxins that are in our home and what they've been doing to our bodies. And so as that becomes more and more known, I think that will help as well.
Well, and I think too that also leads to contractors, digging in their heels even more. I mean, I'm thinking right now I have a client in Michigan who's been working on a bathroom remodel in her house for about 2.5 years. I think she's on contractor number 3.
Oh,
because at some point the contractors start to get frustrated. Now, so what to say about this? And I have to caution my clients all the time because my clients are the ones to basically, wag the finger at the contractor saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that. Anybody, I don't care what line of work you're in, at some point you get sick of people telling you what to do. Contractors especially, because as you said, they've got more work than they know what to do with. So they could just walk from this one and take on the next one and be perfectly happy, much happier than they were getting berated over, what caulking they're using. But, so I tell my clients, again, you have to be respectful. You have to put it in terms that they understand.
yeah.
If you tell a contractor that, listen, I'm a very sensitive person and I can't be first of all, they're going to look at you like you're cuckoo. You have to tell them, and maybe it's a little bit of a fib, but sometimes you have to just tell contractors, listen, there's somebody in the home that's going through some severe health issues, and they cannot be around materials with strong odors and toxins. I'm sure you can relate. And everybody can relate to somebody in their family who has gone through cancer treatments, who has lived through horrible immune system disorders. They understand. If you put it in terms that they can deal with, then they usually will relate. If you make it sound like you're just a crazy person who needs to be away from everything that has a smell, you're going to drive them away. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, believe me, I'm one of those people in certain situations that I would go nuts if somebody was in my house doing these things too. But I have to calm myself down and put it into words that they can understand.
Yes. Yeah, that is. And I think that is such a conversation. It's an important conversation to have with clients while you're kind of guiding them through this process of, I'm the person who's helping you get these things to your contractor. It's a conversation I've had many times. And it's kind of the first thing that we talk about when you're asking for these things, or your contractor is saying, I don't, this is too much for me. I don't want to use, this particular paint. I want to use this paint from Sherwin-Williams that I'm comfortable with. It is all about communicating why, and communicating in a way that does not make it feel like you are demanding something, but you're simply, asking for their empathy
Mm-hmm.
in what's going on. And I think, just saying things like, this is really important to my family or the health of someone in my home, that does really probably speak and go a lot farther
Yeah.
than if we're just demanding things. So I think that's such a great, it's just part of the whole process. I mean,
Right.
it's not really, if you think about it, when you do a consultation and you're going to help someone come up with their project, materials for an addition in their home, it is more than just those products. It's how the work is done. It's communicating with the contractor. And it's, also the materials, but it
Mhm.
all kind of comes together, and it's a learning process for the homeowner, with all of those things. And communication is like key with all of
Yeah.
it.
And as Jay points out here again, telling the contractors, listen, it's not only good for me and my family, but it's also good for you and your staff and your family. Um, I've worked with contractors over the years. I remember there was a wood floor finishing company I worked with, and the owner of the company admitted to me privately that there are most of the water-based finishes on the market he can't use because he'll get a rash all the way up his arms if
Hmm.
he just touches it. And so he started using the Safeco product years ago, and they still use it today.
That's
And
amazing.
and so I had the same thing. This is years ago, 20 years ago, probably doing the National Hardware Show in Las Vegas, and we had um, a somebody representing the wallpaper industry come up to us and ask us, can AFM make a wallpaper paste that's safer? Because these wallpaper guys, they'll have to cover up completely because they will get rashes just from using the cheap wallpaper paste that's out there. And
Mhm.
AFM did. They actually made a wallpaper paste that was completely toxin free that worked wonderfully. Why didn't they use it? Oh, because it was a little bit more expensive.
Right.
And so, what's worse? Getting a rash is just the body telling you there's a problem.
Exactly.
And so what is it doing underneath the skin that you don't see? What is it doing long-term effect? So, all right. So actually want to go back to something you talked about earlier
Yeah.
because um, this is actually happening more and more these days. Um, you had talked about, doing pre-purchase inspections of a home.
Yeah.
All right. So let me tell you about a project I'm working on and get your feedback on this. So
Okay.
I'm working with a client, Ash Brockington, and her husband Sam. They bought a home. They bought their dream home down in the southeast. Um, they move into the home. Everything's great. Within about a year and a half, everyone in the family is starting to get sick.
Yeah.
Their kids are getting sick. Matter of fact, one of them developed a very, very severe um, neurological disorder.
Okay.
And come to find out, the home is absolutely riddled with mold, but there were no signs of it. Usually when you walk into a home that's damaged with mold, you'll see a sign of it, you'll
Yep.
smell it, you'll
Yep.
sense it.
Hmm.
Um, they, I think they even did like ERMI tests and didn't show up with anything.
Okay.
But I had Michael Rubino on the show just a couple of weeks ago, and he's saying, well, yeah, but an ERMI test is only as good as how you test. I mean, if you're not
Yeah.
close enough to the source, you're
Yep.
not going to find it. And so they started opening up walls, and they're up to $150,000 of mold remediation so far in this
Wow.
home. And so, as a building biologist and a mold inspector and a certified home inspector, I mean, what can a homeowner do to protect themselves?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's heartbreaking because that's like, isn't that your biggest fear when you move into a new space? It is like, I just want, and you just want your family to be healthy. That's what I even tell my kids. I just want you to be happy and healthy. That's it. We don't need anything else. And, to protect yourself, a lot of it is going to be before you move in. And yes, your point about you have to test the right way and you have to use the right test is so true. So a lot of times it's mind-boggling to me because yes, when you go into a home, usually you can smell something, which would kind of be a red flag. We need to do a little more investigation. We need to run a test in here, or you see moisture issues.
Right.
Granted, I'm in Minnesota, so what I see is very different, and what I look for is very different than what someone in, say, Florida is going to look for.
Sure.
Because we have snow and we have full basements, and we have issues here that other parts of the country might not have, and they have issues that we don't see. We don't have year-round high humidity. One thing that always comes to mind is homes that have stucco on the outside. Yeah. I always feel like we have to do a little bit more. And so one of the things, I like to take an approach that really looks for issues in multiple ways. So air testing is a huge one. And I think one of the things that I have made it it's very important is you have to have closed home conditions when you do these tests. Yeah. And I think so often real estate agents, sellers, they don't understand that. When I go in and I say, I'm going to run a radon test, have you had the windows closed for 12 hours? I don't know how many times I've gone in. No, yeah. The windows are wide open when I get here. Right. So then we have to delay the test, and you have to tell them, I'm really sorry. I know that you don't have anything but window air conditioners and it's summer, but this is how we have to do the test. Mm-hmm. And the same goes for mold. You have to have closed home conditions. If it's, I always think you can do a swab test. You can do a swab test of, filter media, because that's been going through the air. You can do an actual air test. I like to pair those together. I also really like to use thermal imaging, because sometimes that will give you an idea of moisture somewhere that you didn't see, especially if there's stucco. That has been a really big one in Minnesota. We have a lot of homes that, were built in the 90s, even some of the even older than that, where there can be moisture trapped back there causing issues. And those are kind of the big ones. But I think putting all three of those together with the swab test, the air test, the thermal imaging can maybe give you something, but without owning the home and being able to open up a wall, it is very difficult. And so I think, there always is some level of risk, but you don't want that risk. And so you just do everything in your power that you can. Sure. Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one when you don't even see it and you can't even smell it. Right. I think I have had clients, when they want the home inspection, they also say, no matter what, I want a mold test, because it's something that either they are very aware of or they have a sensitivity to. Sure. It's more expensive. I mean, it definitely adds on when you're talking about, I'm going to get a home inspection and a radon test and a mold test, and I'm going to test mold in all these different areas, because really, the mold test, a lot of times what we do is we'll just pick usually like a lower level. Mm-hmm. If it's a closed off lower level where there's multiple rooms, you might have to do a mold test in these different spaces. Right. And so it adds up. And I think a lot of times that can be a deterrent for someone buying a home, because they're already spending so much money. But at the same time, this is probably your largest investment you will ever make. Mm-hmm. You want to make sure that you're getting the right one and it's healthy for your family. Because being in the position of, okay, now I have $150,000 of mold remediation, I also need to work with, a functional medicine doctor or even specialist to try to heal my body, my kid's body, my family's bodies before we can even go back. And you think about that headache, the money that you're going to invest in a mold test is so worth it if that is the other scenario.
Well, that's it. You look at a home that's $500,000, then you say, okay, I spent $1,000 on testing. Right. Big deal. Yes. Right. Yes. And so, it makes me think of a couple things. First of all, some of the, every building inspector, every home inspector out there should have, and I don't know, if organizations like InterNACHI and these others, when they do their inspection certification classes, if they actually have a course on mold, if they really focus on that.
InterNACHI does. I actually went through their special certification process to and it's not even, I mean, I could test mold no matter what. You
Sure.
don't need the certification, but I went through and learned more. I feel like I may have learned more from other sources. It's very, I don't know, it's almost like inspector level.
Yes.
And so when we talk about an inspector, we call it a non invasive inspection because that's all we're doing. You are
Right.
just looking at what is there. And so it's really on that surface level of, well, you can't really do a whole lot of
Yeah.
digging in a home. And
Right.
so it's just kind of looking for these things. But you also learn a lot when you're out in the field. Um, when you see kind of where areas are that tend to have mold or what type of you know, foundation they have or what type of great, you look for all these things. There are these telltale signs that I kind of, they're like little flags, and I go, okay, I really got to check these other spots in the house and make sure that they're okay. But yeah, so they do have some education on mold, but it's
Mhm.
definitely not as in depth as I think it could go
Right.
because mold can get so broad. It's
Mhm.
not just about the mold, it's about um, is the mold actively growing? Where is the mold? What is it from? I mean, we all probably have mold in our home from the trees outside and the grass outside.
Sure.
And what we really need to pay attention to is the types of mold that grow on damaged building materials. And that's what I like, that's why we take a sample from outside and a sample from inside because we have to
Compare.
have those two things
Yep.
work together. And unfortunately, I didn't learn that through InterNACHI. That was more what I learned when I worked with a company to get all of my supplies. They were,
Right.
I could pick their brain and they could tell me what additional things I could be doing to help my clients.
Mhm.
So
See, I think this would be a perfect time for the Building Biology Association here in the U.S. to actually create what's called a healthy home inspector
yeah.
certification. Basically, taking what you do and then adding in all the things that you've learned over your career to inspect for a healthy home. Now,
Yes.
the downside we have right now in our industry, in real estate, let's say, is that, I mean, you brought it up. Um, Realtors don't really understand this, and this is where, talking with Sheila last week, that's what she's really focusing on, is teaching
Yeah.
realtors to be a healthy home realtor. Inspectors who don't normally understand mold and EMFs, teaching them to be a healthy home inspector, and then
Mhm.
basically you get everybody along in the process to have knowledge that they didn't really have before. And now you've got a few people looking out for you, and so this is what I believe, this is what the consumer is demanding. And, unfortunately, there's, three of us that are doing this in the country, you and I and Sheila, and then any of her associates now that she's teaching. I think that maybe within 10 years this is be something that is much more available.
Yeah.
But we got to start somewhere, and this is a good place to do it. um, so I had another thought that I wanted to bring up. I think it just kind of went over my head. That's all right, because we've talked about a lot of detail today.
Yeah.
Um, you know, if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them on the chat. I know Jay's been active on the chat, and I appreciate that, Jay. Yeah, like he says, every extra penny invested in making sure
Mhm.
it's safe is worth not needing physician assistance, and that's something that we've talked about for decades now. It's like, you
Yeah.
know, what is your health worth? And
Yeah.
if you can avoid all these toxins in your home, I can't tell you how much money you're going to save, or in the long run. I'm not going to tell you you're going to avoid every disease that's out there, but you'll certainly avoid something. And
Yep.
is it worth it, even for peace of mind? And,
Oh
and
yeah.
so, I think that's a
Yeah.
huge thing.
I have been telling people your home is more important than your doctor.
Mhm.
Because really, like, I mean, you don't want to have to need the perfect doctor because you don't want to have to go in. Do you know what I mean? It's like we want to prevent these things. And I think for a lot of my clients, what I see is this becomes very important once they have kids. A lot of the clients that I work with are younger parents. Um, who want to start their kids off on the right foot. And I think that's amazing. And I wish that the information that I share, the information that you share, I wish it were like out in media all the time. But it is something that I don't know. It's like you have to find like your circle of people. I have a few people in my life who are totally on board, and some people are like, you guys are nuts. You think that this is what we need in our lives. But
Right.
it's like, man, I would do anything to protect or to assist my kids and support their health in
Right.
a way that to me is actually very simple. It's just some lifestyle changes here at home, and they're not huge ones. And once you make some changes, it feels pretty normal. It's not, you don't it your old habits kind of fall off. I don't know. I love your idea of a home inspector that also
Mhm.
will inspect for the health of their home. I will tell you that is personally that is like my dream job, and that's kind of what I have tried to do, but I can only do what my buyers want.
Right.
And so it's like I'm always like I offer it, and everyone's like, I just want to know if my house is like going to fall down tomorrow. So let's
Sure.
just look at that for now.
Well,
Um,
yeah, but right now too, you have to understand, I mean, and you know this as well as I do. Right now, homeowners around the country are even waiving their inspections
yes.
just to buy a property, and this is what I worry about: is people are selling garbage properties at premiums because they know that the inspection is going to be waived.
I have seen it. I have seen, and I have actually heard agents in our area say, now's the time to get out of this house. If you ever want to get out of it, sell it
Ugh,
now because this is the only time you're going to be able to get out of here because this is the market right now. And I have gone so far as to offer, like, I will just walk through the house with you at a showing just so that you can have some peace of mind about some things. We obviously can't diagnose the house
right.
fully and completely in an hour, and you're there with other people because that's what the market is. They're all going through the house
Mhm.
at one time. They're going to allow overlapping showings, and so we'll go in and we'll just look at what we can. I've had a few people call me after they buy, and it is like I go in to do this inspection and they're like, they've got like, they don't want to know but they kind of want to know because they already bought it, and so
Right.
only just tell me but be nice about it.
Uh-huh.
And so it's like no one wants to get an inspection after you've bought it. Who wants to hear that news? I just, bought this home. It's the biggest investment that I'll
Yeah.
probably ever make in my life. And I want someone to come in and tell me everything that's wrong with it.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Oh,
so
I had a
yeah,
client I had
it's
a
rough.
client recently who they had a new home built for them, and about 6 months after they moved in the home, they're starting to have problems. So they hired a building inspector to basically inspect it and report it as if, it was a purchase. You
Ouch.
wouldn't believe the stuff that showed up. And it's
Yeah.
basically, roofing materials that were installed incorrectly, flashing details that didn't exist. I mean, just really bad stuff on a new home build.
Mhm.
So if that's on a new home that actually has inspectors going through it during the process to make sure they're following building code, folks, building code is not the end all be all of construction. That is basically the bare minimum they have to meet. It's like, you know, setting up a hurdle they have to jump over, and that hurdle is only about an inch high. You want that hurdle to be about 2 feet high. Make it a challenge, because if it's not a challenge, they're just gonna, blow right through these projects. Anyway, so she got this list. This building inspection must have been 60 pages long. Yeah. Yeah, I
On a
mean,
new
there was
house.
red flags
Whoa.
all over it, and she said, basically, I'm coming up with a list of materials that I'll have to pay for, or jobs I'll have to pay for, and what I can go back to the builder for that's covered under warranty, and
Yeah.
putting together a budget for the next 5 years on basically fixing her brand new home.
And who out there gets an inspection on a new home?
No,
Not
no,
very many people.
nobody.
I've done maybe a handful.
Yeah,
And I can tell you they always kind of explain why they're doing it because
yeah,
they know that people don't do that.
right.
Um but man, I mean sometimes I feel like those are the ones that maybe need it the most. They're not going to have this. You're not going to be looking at the same issues that
Right.
you would see in an older home. It's like,
Sure.
it's just like, it's like repairs compared to brand new and just doing it wrong. And I've seen a lot of it on houses that are flipped.
Yeah.
That's a big
Right.
one. The client walks in, it's beautiful. They just flipped it. And
Mhm.
once you start digging into some of these houses
Ugh.
that have had some just awful work done, you
Right.
kind of go, whoa, it can look beautiful, but we really need to be looking at more than just the cosmetics of this house.
Mhm.
You have to look at what really matters. And unfortunately, a lot can get covered up too.
Yeah,
In
for
homes,
sure.
white paint will cover up a lot. So,
Yeah,
yep.
exactly. I always on those projects, I always, tell my clients, for instance, they hire me to go through Zillow listings. All right, when you walk through the home yourself, just try to sense, do you smell new paint? If you smell new paint, ask them where they painted.
Yeah.
Ask them why they painted.
Yeah.
You can usually get a lot of these, a lot of the backstory based upon why they did certain things. If it
Mhm.
was just to freshen up the house for sale, that's one thing,
Right.
new paint in the living room. Why did you put new paint in the basement? Why are the basement walls
Exactly.
painted?
Yes. I know.
Probably
My
the
favorite is I went in a basement and they had just taken a sprayer and sprayed every wall of the basement. Yet
mm,
you go down and you're like, it smells kind of musty down here. I think maybe there could be more going
right.
on behind this paint. And
Uh,
yeah, and that house was just, there was a slew of issues. It was, I went back to pick up the radon test and there's water in the middle of the kitchen. And we're all going,
mm,
where the heck's that from? And that wasn't there when we did the inspection. I mean, sometimes they know to make homes presentable for inspections. And so it's always interesting when I go back and I have to pick up a testing device
mm.
or we're going to reinspect something to see what it really looks like. Um, so
Wow, wow. All right. Well, for everybody listening, buyer beware, obviously, but in every situation, you need to hire Amanda or somebody like her around the country because I know you work mainly within the Twin Cities, but you do some testing outside of that area as well.
I do. So I do a lot of consultations and those
Mhm.
are virtual. So
Yeah.
lucky for me, I get to meet people all over the country. Some of my testing, like my VOC testing, formaldehyde testing, a little bit of the mold testing, specifically for mycotoxins, can be sent out and we can consult on it and you can do it yourself in home. But like radon, visual, home inspections and air testing for mold, that's all local here in the Twin Cities, and like the suburbs surrounding.
Well, I'm sure you and I at some point are going to start working on that healthy home inspection certification.
Oh my gosh, I would love that. I mean, that has been in my mind for the last 5 years in the
Mhm.
back. But just kind of going, is that something like people need to want it. And I think we're getting really close to that. I feel like there are more and more people who are very aware of these toxins. I think that would be amazing if there were a certification for home inspectors to also understand all the toxins before someone buys a house, because that's when you want to really pay attention to these things. So I'm on board.
Excellent. Good. We have a goal. We're going to do this.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for taking your time today and telling everybody about what you do and what's going on in our industry.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. These are like some of my favorite conversations, and I appreciate being on the podcast, and your audience is amazing. So this is great. I love it. I could do it all day long.